The Select Committee is meeting this evening to consider a report on a resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Jeffrey Bossert Clark in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any time. I'll now recognize myself for an opening statement. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's a part of the oath my colleagues and I took at the beginning of this Congress and in years past. When we were sworn in as representatives, in part of this oath, all of our staff members take, every person who serves this country in uniform, civil servants, and appointees across our government. And it's part of the oath Jeffrey Clark swore the last time he was an Assistant Attorney General at the United States Department of Justice, of all places, to support and defend the Constitution. A year ago right now, while Mr. Clark was bound by the oath, an all-out attack on the Constitution was underway. The former president was waging a campaign to overturn the results of the election. His allies were looking for ways to get around the Constitution and keep him in power. It appears Mr. Clark was central to that effort. The campaign of political pressure and maneuvering failed, but the assault on the rule of law didn't end. It escalated. It resulted in a violent attack on the seat of our democracy. What the former president's inner circle couldn't achieve with lies and unsupported lawsuits, a mob of rioters tried to do by force. So to do our duty as members of this committee, as members of this body, as legislators charged with finding truth about an attack on our democracy and sworn to support and defend the Constitution, we put Mr. Clark on our witness list. As someone who was in direct contact with the former president in days leading up to the January 6th, he has information we believe is relevant to our investigation. When he, unlike hundreds of others, refused to cooperate with our investigation voluntarily, we subpoenaed him on October 13th. And when he appeared for a deposition on November 5th, instead of answering our questions, his lawyer presented the committee with a dozen pages of excuses for defying the law and refusing to comply with our subpoena. We've heard the term contempt of Congress a lot in the last few weeks. We know it's serious business that can land a person in serious trouble, but it can sound a little abstract. So if you want to know what contempt of Congress really looks like, read the transcript of Mr. Clark's deposition and his attorney's correspondence with the Select Committee. Because what you find there is contempt for Congress and for the American people, contempt for the rule of law, contempt for the Constitution. Faced with specific questions, he refused to offer any specific claim of privilege that could shield him from answering. Instead, he hid again and again and again behind his attorney's 12-page letter and vague claims of privilege. Then he said, I'm quoting, "I think that we are done," and he walked out. Mr. Clark's former superiors at the Justice Department didn't hide. Mr. Rosen, Mr. Donahue, they answered the Select Committee's questions for hours about the very same topics we'd like to address with Mr. Clark. Many others have done the same. And there's nothing as extraordinary about Congress seeking the testimony of a former executive branch official. Even the former White House Chief of Staff is now cooperating with our investigation. As permitted by House rules, I considered Mr. Clark's objections and rejected them. The Select Committee provided him the opportunity to return to the deposition, and he refused to do so. I want to note that around 8 o'clock last evening, Mr. Clark's attorney sent a letter to the committee, another in a long series of long letters stating that Mr. Clark now intends to assert his Fifth Amendment privilege against incriminating himself in this process. He offers no specific basis for that assertion. He offers no fact that would allow the committee to consider it. Of course, Mr. Clark had the opportunity to assert this privilege and any other in response to questions we intended to ask him at the November 5th deposition. He declined to do so. He walked out. This is, in my view, a last-ditch attempt to delay the Select Committee's proceedings. However, a Fifth Amendment privilege assertion is a weighty one. Even though Mr. Clark previously had the opportunity to make these claims on the record, the Select Committee will provide him another chance to do so. I am informed, Mr. Clark's attorney, that I am willing to convene another deposition at which Mr. Clark can assert that privilege on a question-by-question basis, which is what the law requires someone who asserts the privilege against self-incrimination. We have just learned that Mr. Clark has agreed to appear again to continue his deposition. However, we will proceed tonight with considering the contempt request, as this is just the first step of the contempt process. We just want the facts, and we need witnesses to cooperate with the legal obligation and provide us with the information about what led to the January 6th attack. Mr. Clark still has that opportunity, and I hope he takes advantage of it. But we will not allow anyone to run out the clock, and we will insist that he must appear on this Saturday. Without objection, the correspondence will all be made part of the record. As with Mr. Bannon, the Select Committee has no desire to be placed in this situation, but Mr. Clark has left us no other choice. He chose this path. He knew what consequences he might face if he did so. This committee and this House must insist on accountability in the face of that sort of defiance. We must honor the oath we took to support and defend the Constitution. We all take that oath very seriously. I'm sure that most public servants do, because if that oath loses meaning, if it is reduced to empty words, then democracy and the rule of law in this country, we are in serious trouble. I urge my colleagues to support adoption of the report recommending that the House of Representatives cite Jeffrey Clark for contempt of Congress and refer him for prosecution by the Department of Justice. And I now recognize a distinguished leader on the Select Committee, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening comments she'd care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr.